My name is Leslie Schaefer. I am the executive director here at the Delaware Contemporary. It was such an honor and pleasure to put together this two-person exhibition we're calling Setting the Table, with two artists who have amazing stature in the art community, and two artists that are working in very different ways. And we love the juxtaposition between the photography, the painting, and the video that we have here on view until the end of the spring. So we're really excited. I have Beth Galton here. Beth, say hello, please.
Hello there.
And then I have Dana Sherwood. And then I have Dana Sherwood. First of all, I just want to thank you for sharing your work with our organization and with our viewing public on site, but also with the millions of people out there in the world who I hope will have the opportunity to hear from both of you about your process, the way you work, and some of the ideas behind what you've been doing over the last several years. So if you don't mind, go ahead and get started. Dana, maybe you can give us a little information on where this idea for the current body of work came from. I know it went through many different phases in many different parts of the world. And if you don't mind just getting us started a little bit on how you began this work.
Mm-hmm. Hi. Well, thanks again, Leslie, for inviting me here. I just wanted to say that. And so my practice started, I guess, as a child, when I used to make food and try and catch animals in my suburban backyard. And I was always kind of fascinated by how you could use what was on the table to kind of make friends and make community, whether that be with humans or animals. And so I had done many projects over the years where I was experimenting with how food changes in nature over time. I was really interested in food as being a kind of cultural transformation of a natural object. And so I would put food out. I had brought animals into the gallery, and that didn't really work out very well. And I had gone to, Cape Town, South Africa, and tried to feed baboons and film that. And that was very scary. And so I was like, I really don't want to do that anymore. And then I had started by going to places like Denmark and Brazil and suburban South Florida, and just kind of putting food out in the environment. And I use special cameras that make no sound. They don't need electricity. They're weatherproof. They're made for filming animals. And sometimes I would have these grand successes, as you can see in Feral Cakes, which is on view there. That was in Florida. And sometimes I would have these massive failures where I would spend weeks trying to get animals to show up on film and eat the food that I put out, but they wouldn't. And so, but those failures kind of shed light on this kind of extraordinary power of nature to be completely not at our behest, and the animals are not my performers. And so I was really kind of excited by the idea that nature was nature, and there was nothing humans could do, no matter how smart we think we are, that nature is out of our control. And so I began to work with nature. And so the first paintings that you have on view there, the earlier paintings, were when I was, depicting planning of, the Cape Town one, which we have, which was kind of a menu plan for the baboons. And then it became kind of depictions of what I was picking up on camera. And the more I started making videos that didn't rely on food. They, like the horse video that you had, they relied on communication through energetic experience, through touch, through proximity. And I had trained to second degree level of Reiki. I trained with someone who specializes in horse communication and therapeutic work through the energy of horses. And so I know it's a lot, but that's kind of, I went through all of these different ways of how do we live with animals, and how do they fulfill expectations, and how do they thwart expectations, and how amazing is that? And so the most recent body of paintings, which you have on view there, the inside the body of a swan and inside the belly of the shell of a snail, those were experiences where I started to think like, wow, I have learned so much from these experiences with animals and these experiences in nature. And what would it be like if I wasn't raised by a human mother? What if I had been raised inside the belly of a horse or inside the belly of a swan, and animals that I had a kind of cosmology, you know, my own personal cosmology of horses and snails and swans, which I've done projects with and worked with since I was a child. And so it's kind of this culmination, this idea of really connecting with nature and discovering yourself, and kind of transformation that can happen through that experience and that relationship.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you taking us through from the initial drawing that we have, the menu, all the way up until today. You know, I think, Beth, you have a similar story in your trajectory, which is that the work that we're seeing here started at one place and has evolved through a learning process, such as Dana. Do you mind walking us through?
Thank you again for inviting me to be part of this amazing exhibition. But I feel very honored to be a part of it. You know, I started in the commercial world and fell into being a food photographer. And because of my background, you know, I have a liberal arts background. I studied fine arts, so I studied painting and ceramics, and was really exposed to all sorts of art. As well as nature. It has always been a passion. So I started in the commercial world, kind of lost, trying to figure out where I wanted to go, and ended up falling into photographing food. And I find that my fine art background kind of influences my commercial work, as well as my commercial work is influenced by my personal work. So the work that you have on the walls there is, some of it is a collaboration with food stylists and prop stylists, and some of it is kind of my obsession with wandering through the farmer's market and finding fruits and vegetables that are incredibly inspiring. Because again, like Dana, nature to me is just this remarkable thing that we can't influence, that it just produces what it's going to produce. And then I know I'm kind of rambling here, but then I take these objects and, like the panoramic photographs are really about that moment in time, about bringing a meal together, about setting the table, about what we bring to those moments and what happens as they transgress. So, it can be the aftermath, it can be before, depending on the images that you have on the wall. And then the food loss photos are really about kind of looking at food that's kind of evolved and kind of lost its shape and is no longer at what we consider appetizing. And I think part of that for me has been photographing these items so that to kind of show the beauty in things that go past their prime, that it's not necessarily about finding the most beautiful orange or finding the most beautiful piece of ginger, but that there's beauty in as things age. And it's been kind of a theme that's gone through a lot of my work about this aging process, about finding beauty in that. And then the colorful images were really kind of inspired by paintings. And I love the idea of kind of trying to find either complementary colors or colors that were chronological. And, again, I wandered the farmer's market, found food, ingredients that were really amazing in color, painted backdrops that we could put with them, and then worked with the food stylist who came up with food, using those objects that I collected and making them into something that is edible, but again, plays with the color story.
So there's a lot of overlap in your work, but there's a lot of just uniqueness among the ways that you're working. Both of you, I think, deal a lot with staging, right? You're putting together some kind of event, and we do it all the time, right? Whenever we have, it could even be as little as breakfast or lunch, or it could be a traditional holiday meal, it could be just a celebration, but we're thinking about the presentation, and you both think about that so carefully, and then document it here in the drawings and in the videos and in the paintings and in the photographs. And I wonder if you could maybe, Beth, speak a little bit more about your staging process. Is it, how do these sets come about for you? The ones that you say are pretty immediate, are those something that you've created? So the panoramics, for example, are they an actual event that's taken place and you've documented it?
Everything in my photographs are created. I'm not the kind of photographer that wanders the world and finds images to take. I come up with an idea, or I'll work with the food stylists and we'll come up with an idea like the panoramas. We collaborated on this idea of different moments when people come together. And so everything is created in the studio. It's really thoughtfully put together.
Yeah, well, they look thoughtfully put together, but they also have this sort of immediacy to them. They could be caught after a big banquet or a meal or engagement with the Chinese food store down the street. They're beautifully staged. And Dana, I don't know if you've had a chance to see some of her panoramas, but they have an element of the Dutch still life, right? They feel as if, when painters were painting at that time, they were so carefully organizing the materials that were within the painting, from the lighting to the shadowing to the choice of what it was that they were painting within their subject matter. And I felt that you really captured that so well with this edge on it, which is, it appears to be perfect at the beginning. And as you look closer, you start to see some of the things that are not the expectation of this well-constructed still life from a Dutch painting, but rather a more contemporary look. We really have been having a wonderful time looking at those. Dana, how do you decide what it is that goes on the table for the nature that's either deeper in the woods or right outside our back door, or for the horses that you connected with?
So, for me, I always started with looking at nature guides and field guides and behavior guides to particular species that I might expect to find in an area. And, what I've learned over the years is, though, for instance, even though, a text might say that mice like to eat corn and millet and seeds and vegetables and water, what I found that mice actually like to eat sugar, and raccoons and baboons prefer pizza to snails and bugs and berries, So for me, I like to kind of play with both of those things at the same time. So I'll start, my practice has evolved over the years. So some of my first projects, what I would do is I would start out with the kind of official diet of the raccoon or the fox or the possum and put that out. And of course, I'm thinking also about Dutch still life. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that was the first thing I thought of when I saw Beth's photographs. I love the symbology in Dutch still life painting, and the kind of history of the vanitas painting, right? And I think that's kind of sums everything up when you think about working with nature and the cycles. But so then I would kind of, over the course of, let's say I'm filming for a month or 3 months, I'll start to see like, well, the animals, they don't like kale and they don't eat the broccoli. And so I would try and have a conversation with them through food. And so I would put out the kale and the broccoli, and then I might say, well, I got some extra donuts in my kitchen. Let me see if they like those donuts. Oh yeah, they like the donuts. And, and so that was kind of my earlier projects, was I would work like that. And eventually the table would be covered in donuts and hot dogs, because that was what they actually wanted to eat. And that's what I was, through my documentation process discovering. So it was kind of this idea in the initial projects of science or, textbooks saying one thing, but then in actuality, nature was different. It wasn't behaving like this pristine thing that we kind of held in this bubble that wasn't real, and so I had started doing research and seeing that there's actually more raccoons the more people live in an area. So if you go to the middle of the forest, you're less likely to see raccoons than if you go to, say, the center of Toronto, which is the raccoon capital of the world, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah. And so I love this idea of like boundaries kind of being a little bit blurry. And so you might not know that there's a family of raccoons in your backyard or your possums, but they know, but they're there because you're there and they're benefiting from our refuse. And then over, the course of several projects, I started working with the natural diet, but kind of making it into these forms that resembled these towering jellies that you saw in the 19th century. I was fascinated with carême and these kind of early food sculptors from the 18th century, but also the idea of the housewife in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, making these like towering jellos as these kind of centerpieces for parties and celebration. So I also love the kind of mirroring of the tamed woman, kind of this domestic goddess, and observing these wild animals eating these very high cultural food products. But I found that I could make these beautiful, elaborate desserts using real ingredients, very simple ingredients like plain gelatin in my elaborate collection of fantastic jelly molds, but fill them with grapes, with beef, with raw chicken. And that is what became these kind of beautiful still lifes that you see in feral cakes. So it's kind of using these mechanisms of ornamentation for display purposes, using whole food ingredients that the animals do like to eat, like raw chicken. They really like raw chicken and grapes, and it varies, from year to year and species to species, of course. And then I did want to, and I just love also cake I think of cake as a liminal space. Like when the cake is on the table, where it's not just a regular ordinary day, it's a ritual, it's a celebration, it's something really special that takes you out of your everyday life and kind of infuses the world with a magic. So I also like to think about the food as this kind of magical offering.
Well, I love that your tenacity, right? To try to figure out what it is that you can find that is appetizing and delicious and consumable by your subject, right? And that level of experimentation, I think you mentioned this maybe in an earlier writing that I read about, trying to really write a script for this that then had to go in a different direction, and that the struggle, it sounds like, is part of the work in itself. And I think it also speaks to how we as a human, put that cake on at the last minute, hoping, we've accounted for our friends that are vegan, we've accounted for our gluten-free friends, we've accounted for those that have specific preferences, but at the end they may still come to the table, and we don't know how they're going to behave once they sit down. We can only get to it at a certain point. I wonder, Beth, if you have had any of those struggles with food. Your subject doesn't move, but have you in your work in your studio still had to figure out how to control an object for a certain amount of time. Some of them that I'm looking at look pretty precariously placed, and I'm wondering if you could speak on that a little bit about that in your process.
I think that my process is, we come up with a concept, and then it's a pretty fluid process in a way. Excuse me, when because it will just evolve, and I'm not. There are photographers who are very like, I want this here, I want this to be this way, but I really love finding those happy moments and finding those situations that just happen and are very inspiring. Sometimes with food, you have to work really quickly, especially photograph. If it's something prepared, we have to, we'll put a stand-in. Sometimes we'll create a stand-in so that we can do the composition and then say, okay, we're ready to go. Let's go for it, and then recreate everything so that it's as fresh as possible. So it's a kind of combination of different approaches depending on what's involved in the image.
I think for me, we put together this exhibition is part of a larger group of exhibitions under the topic of nourish. And I jumped right on to nourishing ourselves with food. But there's nourishing ourselves within a community. There's nourishing our community. There are those people who, nourish us. We nourish our environment and those things in our environment. And so while the subject immediately may be feeding and taking and growing our bodies that way, both of your work, I think, fits within that broader conversation about nourish. And I wonder if that's something that you had ever considered as you were, how your work might nourish our viewers, what you want our viewers to take away from seeing and interacting with the work in person or online.
Well, for me, the work is about the nourishment that we get from our experiences with nature, with our community. And food has always been, for me, the way that you bring community together. So it's something that I guess you can read as the nourishment of food, but also the nourishment of community and connection that can be brought together through food in a fairly simple way. I also think of art as being like the most nourishing thing. I mean, like nature, and everybody has their different things that nourish them, that they have to have in their lives. There's nothing like seeing art that touches you or that resonates with you in some way. And I think that especially over the last few years, art has really been, and creative process has just been a way of really feeling connected when we've been so separated,
I love that you said that. We have, in association with this exhibition and with the suite of exhibitions, reached out to community that I think haven't had the opportunity, or there's been barriers for them to actually experience that, how art nourishes us. And so we are hoping, by opening our galleries, and with this exhibition in particular, there's common ground, right? Like you said, setting the table or eating a meal or sharing a kind of food. We all have some sort of relationship with those things, whatever that means. And so I think that food in general is one thing that we can always come around and talk about and talk with each other about. So thank you for that comment. Beth, did you have anything to add to the ideas around nourish and community, or nourish and viewers?
I think also the whole act of putting together a meal and serving it is about love and about connection. And particularly with the way our world is, that we're all so separate, separated, that to me, these are always about this act of love, of kind of bringing people together.
I agree. I think the gesture, no matter how grand or not it is always about that thoughtfulness and that caring for one another or for a group of people. And with both of your work, it comes out. You can see the care that has been taken just in the development of the work, right? To communicate those ideas. So we're really interested. I'm wondering, Beth, how many photographs, when somebody's being filmed or photographed and you get the bank of images and, they're all just slightly off. How many do you take of each one? And then you have to make a choice, right? You have to narrow it in on that. Is it something like a photo shoot of a model, or is it,
Usually excuse me, it's a process of a meal, like the panorama behind you, is that we'll start where it's really perfect, and then we'll slowly pull it apart. And so I will end up with a whole bunch of images, but then I look for the one that really resonates with me and kind of tells the story of what I'm feeling, what I want to communicate. So that's the joy of digital. When I was first started, we shot on an 8x10 film, and we had to kind of decide, okay, this was the moment. But I find that digital has been so freeing and allowed me to be much more creative in a way that I can push the limits and then find the spot that really resonates the most to me.
And likewise for you, Dana, you're filming, and how do you go through the different scenes of the films that you've made before you make find one selection for your painting? Because the paintings do come after, correct? The paintings are post-production.
Sometimes
oh,
they do.
okay.
But I think more interesting than finding the best image for a painting is just the process of making the videos, because most of the videos I started making are the ones that you have there for sure, and the later ones I started making after I had my son. And so when he was first born, the video that you have there, Feral Cakes, so I would set up the cameras. This is something I could do with a newborn. There wasn't very much I could do otherwise. I would set up the cameras. I would make the food in the day because the jellos would take a while to set up. They're layered. And I could do that in the day. And then I would put him to bed at 7. And then I would put the food out right after that at dusk. And then I would set up the cameras, and I might have I could have 300 video clips the next morning. So it's an incredible process. And especially the most recent video, I had so much video, it's so insane. I would wake up in the morning. When he woke up, I would go outside, get my video chip, and sit and breastfeed for an hour or two to some crazy, newborns. It's all you do. And while I was breastfeeding, I would go through on my computer all of the clips from the night before. And, I have a color coding system. So, red is raccoons, orange is possums, purple is house cats. Some of them just get thrown in the garbage. Some of them get an extra color if they're really, really good. And then at the end of, so I would do that every day. And then at the end of 3 months, then I have to go back and edit the ones that are the really, really good ones get to maybe go in, or, you have to kind of finalize. But that was one of, I was just thought of this because I was just meeting with MFA students at the University of South Carolina. And one of them has a young baby. And she said, well, what did you do when you had what kind of art could you make? And I was like, that's when I really got into the videos, because that was all I could do. And, the Mongolia video, which you're not showing, I shot in Mongolia when he was probably 18 months old, the second time that we went there. And I shot the horses with this camera that I made, because that was one, that I had to be able to work and parent at the same time. And so, he wasn't even meant to be in the video, but he started just walking up to the camera lens. And, and the thing that's amazing about that is that the video itself was about how we communicate when we don't have this verbal language to understand one another. And he was making his very first attempts at forming words. And so he became the soundtrack, and he became, this kind of look at, and investigating the camera the same way the horses were. And it's just been, it's so fascinating how through nature, through parenthood, through just allowing to let things just go the way that they're going to go, and to kind of be present and accepting of whatever's happening in your life. And that's how the work gets made.
I have some thoughts too. It's interesting that your videos you have to let go of everything and let it just happen. And yet your paintings are very precise. They're kind of the antithesis of the videos. And the other question I had for you is, did you find that putting the food out, did it begin to change the animals' behavior? Did you have the same animals coming back day after day, or were they, and if so, how did it change their behavior?
The animals came back day after day, the same animals at the same time. They were waiting for me. So in the Feral Cakes video in the beginning, you can see me pulling a plastic sheet off. That's because it would take 5 or 6 trips back and forth. And I knew that they were waiting for the food, and I didn't want them to start eating until I finished laying it out. But it was always a different, I shot in that location for 5 years, and I'd get the same family of animals for 2 years, and then they would kind of move on or die. I don't know. And then there would be another family. And in Connecticut, I just did a piece, and it was the same raccoon and the same possum that I joked. They would be like, all right, guys, it's 7 o'clock. Let's head over to the museum. But there was never any kind of behavior that was troubling or, problematic. And then I would like to talk about the paintings, because you have the entire kind of suite of paintings that kind of show the trajectory of my painting work. And they started out, even those first earliest ones are the tightest, most precise drawings and watercolors that I would get so worried about making a mistake, and I didn't want to have to erase a line. I wanted it to just be, I wanted to make the perfect line. And so at the end of the day, I would get so exhausted from and it would take a week to make something that I could now do in easily in a day, because I was so worried about messing up the painting. And so when I made the Feral Cakes video, and after I had this kind of failure video in Denmark, I thought, well, the videos are better when I just let it go a little. So maybe I should just lighten up a little on the painting. And so the next group of paintings, the Feral Cakes contemporary paintings, I just would allow myself a 3-minute sketch, and then I had to just paint. And then if the watercolor, if I wanted to change it, I just had to paint over it. And then I was like, well, watercolor is really cool because it shows the history. You can still, you can change it, but it's not a mistake. It shows the layers of history of how you make a painting. And it's so interesting. And then same thing going forward. And so, yeah, I'm always I love how painting and art making allows you to kind of, this kind of push and pull of perfectionism, and also just let it go, because it needs to have some kind of freedom to it. You need to feel the vulnerability in the work. So, I mean, hopefully the paintings seem a little bit less uptight as they go on, but the earliest paintings, I mean, they're beautiful. I like those paintings, but it was definitely I was super uptight about making them perfect. And I think I learned, and I appreciate that perfection isn't necessarily mean good art.
Right. It's true. It's funny because when I first started as a commercial photographer, when we would do a food shoot, everything had to be perfect. I remember we shot for Uncle Ben's, and they went through the grains of rice to look for the broken grains of rice. It was so controlled. And the great part about food photography now is it's a lot looser. But and for me personally, the control part was always a hard thing to do because I don't like repeating myself. I don't want to, and I know even, when I would do TV commercials, I wanted everything preconceived. And for me, the spontaneity is what makes it really fun. It's like you think that it's going to be this, but then all of a sudden something magical will happen. And even though my photographs look very thought out, there are those magical moments where just things come together, and that looseness where you think, oh, look, what if we do this? And it just makes it so much better. Yeah.
How did
Well,
you end up getting
okay.
started in food photography? It just seems like such a dream job.
When I started in the 80s. And at that point, I photographed everything. I did watches and liquor and whatever came my way. And then the business kind of changed, and they said, okay, you have to pick a direction. And I just kind of fell into food because I love the organic nature of food, and it really does go back to nature, which is kind of where I started, my passion for nature. So it just was kind of a natural place to go. It's funny because now I'm just shooting botanicals more than food, but I do kind of circle back to food every so often because in the height of the summer, the farmers market is just amazing. There's so much there.
Yeah. Right now, I think it's like been radicchio season. And there's like one store upstate that like specializes in bringing radicchios from Venice, I guess. But like in the city, you have like that selection too. But do you love them? They're just like amazing.
So amazing. There's only one place, Italy in Manhattan.
That's what I was thinking.
And there's like 6 different types. It's so amazing. And they're so beautiful. Just
I had gone to like, it's so funny because you're talking about like going to farmers markets and like being obsessed with seeing it. And I'm sure that's like the first thing you do when you travel. But like, I was just scrolling through my photos, and I think it's like one of my best photos that I've seen on my camera roll. But it was at the farmers market in like somewhere near Whitechapel in London. And they had all the radicchios, also like really exotic radicchios, but like laid out on this like blackboard slate or something. I don't know. And they just were so beautiful. And I had to stop. I was just scrolling through. I was looking for a picture of my son for something. And I had to stop because I was like, oh my God, it's just so beautiful.
Yeah. The radicchio now is just amazing. No question. Yeah.
So before I kind of conclude our conversation, I want to first of all thank you for inspiring our audiences to think about food, to think about these gestures, to think about the formality or informality of the way that we come together, to think about what nourishes us, about consumer and consumption. All of these different things are great launching points for our community to think about. And I think it's really inspired all of us and all of our audiences to rethink their relationship with food, with the table, with with nourishing ourselves and our family and friends. I wonder, and I know a little bit, that you mentioned you've been moving more into botanicals, but you recently sent on that amazing suite of photographs that you're doing around the abortion issue. I wonder if you might talk about new directions, and then same with you, Dana, maybe when what's next, what are the next projects that you're thinking about?
Well, I feel very fortunate to have this gift of being creative and telling stories, because stories are really important to my imagery, whether it's obvious or not. And I was really distressed by the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And I thought I wanted to do something around that. And I began to realize that women who don't have access to abortions now are on the web looking for what alternatives they have. And when you do that, you find it's frightening what you find. And it's really about going back in time. And I thought using a Dutch painting, Veritas, approach would be the perfect way to send that message. So I actually wrote a proposal and sent it to the Washington Post, and they really liked it and said, okay, well, we'll pay for it, because I felt it was, to really do it right, I needed a crew, I needed a prop stylist who could source the different objects that we needed, as well as putting it all together, that it required more of a production than just me doing it myself. But I want to use my craft to send messages that are important to me.
We will definitely link it on our website to that article and those images. They're really powerful, really pretty stunning, and gorgeous as well. Your ability to really put these pieces together, these objects together, it's quite alarming and beautiful at the same time. So
Well,
congratulations on that too.
Thank you. I think also the idea of making something beautiful, and then people say, oh, look how beautiful, and then pulling them in to really look at it closely and see the message.
Yeah.
That was part of the process, as well as taking classic objects that you find in Dutch paintings that were represented subject matter of death or illness, or and try to integrate that in there as well. I did a lot of research about that.
They're very successful. Thank you for sharing those. Dana, what projects are you thinking about? I
have started getting back to ceramics over the last couple of years, which was something that I did initially when I was first started at university. So I'm kind of investigating this classical forms like amphora and the kind of things you would see like Greek vases and Etruscan vases, and then but putting these kind of imagery that you see from the paintings, these kind of women inside of animals, and this kind of what I call my animal cosmography, which is kind of like a symbolic language of personal histories with animals, and then putting them on these classical forms. And then I'm working on a couple of shows. So I have a show in Italy next year at the Foundation More Greco in Naples. So that it's a big space. So I'm kind of working on a lot of new paintings and some other shows up here and in Montana and a few places. So I'm kind of back in the studio. I just finished a big year, so I'm allowed to play and experiment. And so that's kind of what I'm doing, is drawing and painting at the moment. And I just did a show at the University of Massachusetts where we made kind of coming back to, we're talking about the idea of nourish. I had a 2-week, the show was up for 3 months, but for 2 weeks, I invited the community to come and make teacups with me. And we drank tea from the herbs that I gathered in my garden and in the forest. And it was a moment for people to come back together and drink and make things together and have this kind of creative community that I had been longing for the last, 2.5, 3 years. And so hopefully all of the we've made over 100 ceramic pieces together. And hopefully that will be turned into a video project at some point, which is the intention of using those community made cups to serve the animal community.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. Thank you for taking the time today, but thank you for loaning us your work so that we can share it here in Wilmington. And please keep in touch with us on how those projects evolve, where we can see them next.